Zoe got the divorce papers on Monday morning. She was in the middle of doing the laundry when the bell rang and she was served the divorce papers. She sat in the pristine kitchen, staring at the documents, confused. If the papers weren't directly addressed to her, she would have believed it was a case of mistaken identity. Or perhaps this was a prank and a TV production crew would jump out from the hedges. However, this was her reality. A confusing reality. Bruce, her husband of 15 years, was divorcing her. Just this morning, she had set out his clothes for work, made breakfast for him, and carried his bag to the car, waving him goodbye before returning to the house to start the house chores. Her friend Nancy hurried over, and she burst into tears, shoving the papers at her. "This has got to be a joke, right?" Otherwise, why on earth would her husband divorce her? It just didn't make sense. "Have there been any problems? Have you guys been fighting?" Nancy asked. They had never raised their voices against each other in all the years they were married. Sure, their marriage was not the same as it had been when they married. There was some distance between them, and they were not as intimate as they used to be. Still, a divorce? Just last week, she suggested they go on a vacation, and he gave her the go-ahead to find exotic places. "Have you spoken to him?" Nancy asked. "His secretary says he's busy every time I call," Zoe said. All day, Zoe was not herself. She was in a blank state, staring at the walls, over and over. She tried to think about what had gone wrong in their marriage. She was a good and obedient wife. She stayed home, tendering to the house, while Bruce provided for the family. Bruce came home late. She was asleep, but she hurried out of bed. "What's going on, Bruce?" she asked, waving the papers. She stared at him, hoping he would apologize and tell her it was a mistake. "It is what it is. I want a divorce," he said, reaching for a bottle of scotch. She shook her head in disbelief. "No, no, no! You can't do this, Bruce, please! What have I done wrong? Please tell me. I will change. I will." "You have done nothing wrong. It's just, I'm tired, Zoe. I need more from a wife," Bruce said. She stared at him, confused. What did he mean? "I need a wife who's not as boring as you are. A wife who goes out there to work. A good-looking wife. A wife I can show to the world." She staggered at his words. You told me to quit my job." 10 years ago, she quit her job as a lawyer to be his wife. It had been a great sacrifice, but Bruce convinced her that being a traditional wife was suitable for their marriage. "Well, I changed my mind," Bruce said. "I will get a job. I know I've been out of work, but I don't want to be married to you anymore. I'm sorry, Zoe, but that is it. You have to admit it. This marriage is headed for the storms. We are no longer compatible." Zoe screamed, a scream filled with the pain that overwhelmed her, and then she broke down right on the floor, her heart ripped into two. The next few weeks were tough for Zoe. Bruce moved out of the house, advising her to get a lawyer. Every attempt by her to reach out to him for recognition was abortive. Their mutual friends she called to intervene had nothing to say but extended their pity to her. "You need to get a lawyer fast," as she read through the latest summons delivered by Bruce's lawyers, Nancy said. She had gone through them and couldn't believe it. Since they had no children, he was leaving her with nothing. He was even taking the house from her. How was she supposed to survive? "I understand that you still love him and want to settle this amicably, but Zoe, he's doing you dirty. After 15 years of being with him, he's offering you nothing? You deserve more than this," Nancy said. Zoe stared away, absently. She didn't even know what day it was. She barely ate and moped around the house, trying to come to terms with her reality. It still felt like a cruel joke, and a part of her hoped that Bruce would return home with an apology. "Zoe, I'm worried about you," Nancy said with concern. Zoe didn't get a lawyer. She missed out on the meetings with Bruce and his lawyers. The blinds were drawn closed as she sat indoors in the house, wrapped in the overbearing pain that enveloped her. 15 good years she had dedicated herself to her marriage with Bruce. Court summons came in the following week. She would be held in contempt of the court if she didn't appear at the next hearing date. She would not only lose her marriage, she could also go to jail. "Mr. Bruce is not here," the secretary said when Zoe showed up the following day at his office. "Where did he go?" Zoe asked. Bruce was a hard worker and spent most of his time at the office when he was not home. He worked at a renowned real estate firm in the city, and his clientele comprised politicians, prosperous businessmen, and women. "I cannot disclose that to you," the secretary said. "But I am his wife," Zoe defended. The woman had always been polite, but treated her coldly with what was happening. "Have a lovely day, ma'am," the secretary said. "Ma'am, you cannot go in there. Ma'am!" Zoe hurried past the reception. She refused to believe the woman. Having spotted Bruce's car at the front, she was headed straight to his office when she heard voices of excitement in the conference room. There was a little gathering, with Bruce the center of attraction. Everyone had filled wine glasses in their hands. "Bruce?" she called out in a tiny voice. Bruce was surprised to see her there, and so were his colleagues, who had, over the years, become her friends. She had invited them to her home for dinner in the past years. "Zoe, what are you doing here?" Bruce asked as he pulled away from a blonde woman. Charity was her name, as she had been a guest at their home. Her eyes rested on Charity's pregnancy bump. "What's going on here?" Zoe asked. "You are not supposed to be here," Bruce said. "What's going on here?" her voice raised. "We were going to tell you eventually," Charity said, placing her hand over her bump. "Bruce and I are having a baby." For the next few seconds, she heard nothing, not the honks of the car below in the streets, not the clacking of keyboards coming from the next room. Not even her heart was beating. A tear slid down her eyes as she stared at the man she loved with all of her heart. "You said you didn't want children. You... After a year of marriage, she had suggested they start trying to have kids, and Bruce had sat her down and told her he didn't want children. He told her children were very dedicated and would rather they enjoy their lives without the extra baggage. It was a tough pill to swallow. She had always wanted to be a mother. While dating, she would tell him she wanted 3 children, and he would smile. He had told her she could leave if she wished to be different, but how could she have left him? They had a scare a year later, and he held her hand while the doctors tied her fallopian tubes. How could he be so cruel? "I'm sorry, Zoe, but it just happened. She wants to keep the child." "And you? What do you want?" Zoe asked as tears streamed down her face. "I want to be a father," Bruce said. Zoe yelled, flinging herself at him in rage. How could he have done this to her? She was pulled back by one of his colleagues, whom she lashed at. They had all known what was happening, but had kept it a secret. "How long has this been going on? How long?" she yelled. "You need to calm down," Miriam, his colleague, said. She glared at the woman, glared at all of them. How stupid she had been to expect loyalty for them. She had catered for Miriam's birthday just last year. She had been with Hakeem in the hospital a few months ago when he had kidney surgery. She had been there for everyone, but in her moment of tribulation, they took sides with her husband, abandoning her. "Don't freaking tell me to calm down! How long has this been going on?" she yelled. "About 2 years," Bruce said. "We were having issues, and..." She walked away, from him and every one of them. For 2 years he had been unfaithful. He had kept all of this a secret for 2 years, and he had been aided by those she considered family. Zoe had no idea how she got home. Immediately after getting home, she settled on a couch and searched through the contacts on her phone. It had been years since she last spoke to Dan, but what she knew to this day was that he was a good divorce lawyer, and with her whole life falling apart, she needed him. It was a tense meeting a couple of weeks later when Zoe met with Bruce and his lawyers. She had almost not made the meeting. She had stared at herself in the mirror, staring at herself in fear. She had been unwilling to let go of Bruce for a while, but now was the time. He had moved on, and so would she. "It's going to be okay," Dan, her lawyer, assured her. They had been in constant communication since she reached out to him. He was excited to reunite with her and had been very pissed to listen to her tell him about what was happening. He promised to take Bruce to the cleaners, ensuring he paid for what he did. Bruce glared at her as they walked into the room. Dan had been going back and forth with Bruce's lawyer, giving her updates on what was happening. At first, she was afraid of what Dan was asking for, the house and half of his net worth. It seemed ridiculous, but Dan assured her that things would be in their favor. If we don't reach an agreement, we will be going to trial, Dan said. She was worried about this, but Dan also assured her. I didn't think you were a gold digger, Bruce spat out. Dan flared up. Zoe held him back, sensing his anger. She stared at her husband. How much she had loved him, wasting 15 years of her life. I forgive you, Zoe said. It was easy saying those words. Months ago, she hated him passionately, but she had grown in these past months. She had started working out at the gym, reunited with her old friends, and even started working on the plan for a catering and event planning business. So, are you ready to give me what I want? Zoe asked. Dan scribbled his signature on the document, and Zoe smiled. She had a long way to go, but she would not give up on loving herself.
Things were never smooth for Jack and his mom. Jack was an artist from birth, and he lost his father when he was just a kid. He grew up in the hands of his mom in a single-room apartment. They were their neighbors themselves, as no one in the neighborhood wanted to associate with them. Jack's mom, Ms. Jane, had gone from one menial work to another to put food on the table for herself and her poor son. She often joined combined 3 works in a day to provide for his autistic son, who she had earlier enrolled in one of the best schools in the city. Her neighbors often laughed and made fun of her for being poor and having expensive taste. They talked behind her back as they were awed why she had decided to send her son to the almighty St. Hallmark's amongst all other affordable schools where her caliber often sent their kids. After several unanswered questions from these busybodies, they challenged Miss Jane about why she had to risk all that for her kid. In her words, she replied to her critics by saying, "Even though I'm poor, I wouldn't want my son to grow up in the circle of the mediocre. Growing up and mixing with the kids of the rich will help my son build a sharp mindset toward money and have a better connection that will eventually help him in the future. I wouldn't mind working all around the clock to give my son the best." Some of these critics saw some sense in the reason behind her actions, while some called her dumb and criticized her further. Ms. Jane seemed unbothered as she still ran 3 to 4 jobs to achieve her dream for her son. She had 1 full-time job and 2 part-time. She was a full-time janitress. She always resumed work as early as 6 a.m. and close around 5 p.m., granting her the rest of the day to settle down for her other jobs. Who said it was easy? It was never easy. Sometimes she missed sleep as she had to prepare for the next day. She had to take care of her autistic son and prepare his meal before he left for school. Jack was a term in high school. His experience had been terrific as he wasn't getting any fun from school. He was bullied every day by his classmates. This must have been because of his health conditions and his mom's financial status. He came from a different world from the other students. They avoided him like the plague. He tried making friends with them, but they knocked him in the head or kicked him in the ass, yelling at him to stay away from them. He soon started isolating himself. As if that was enough for these bullies, they still went for him in his isolation. They would drag him and make jest of him for being physically impaired. They laughed at him because his mom was a janitor in a small company down the road, and she had to sponsor his education with the stipends she was earning. Their teacher witnessed their callous and uncultured acts towards the poor Jack, and she chastised them for it. She asked that they apologize to him and never try such again. Jack felt so bad about the ridicule his classmates and schoolmates generally made out of him. He was pained to the bone marrow. He wanted to change the narrative. He felt so pissed with himself and concluded he wouldn't let himself remain public trash where everyone dumps insults, and for his poor mom, he was going to do something. Jack decided to go out all to make life better for himself and his mom, and at least stop being a piece of mockery, and most significantly, stop his mom from working as a janitor. That was his utmost drive. He started working. He tried to sell his services. In the bid, he became a freelancer online since he had learned some skills on YouTube. The design had always got his attention, and he breathed it. Even in his subconsciousness, or whenever he was lost in his thought, he would draw on the ground with his index finger, trying to craft a new design. His classmates called him weird for that, so he took his time to learn it extensively. He became very good at it, and his talent had just met professionalism. He started selling his skill on freelance websites and making some cool cash. He was ecstatic the day he got his first project. He couldn't hold his joy as he jumped without bothering about his condition. Tears flowed down his cheeks like a baby. You would think he was just declared the next president of the U.S. The project was just a $10 work. It was small, but he didn't mind. It was not really about the money to him, but the fact that he could get hired and paid afterward swept him off his feet. When his mom returned, he quickly ran to her and hugged her. The mom was shocked to have seen her son happy again after the tough times he had been going through in his school. She couldn't help but wonder what had got Jack very pleased, but she sure knew there was a reason behind his strange happiness. In a keen voice, she asked him, "My baby, what is it?" Jack told his mom about the good news, and he promised to make sure she stopped working as a janitor. He executed the project diligently, and he was rewarded soon. He got another work after a week. This time it was $50. He was convinced this was the pace setter for him and his mom. He pleaded with his mom to quit her full-time job while he took care of them. However, he tried to calm him to take things slowly. She would stop eventually, but it wasn't time yet. He wasn't pleased with his mom's decision, but gave in after several persuasion from the mom. 6 months down the line, Jack had been able to amass thousands of dollars. He was able to do this with his beautiful creativity and hard work. He had sleepless nights and sometimes missed school to meet up with deliveries. He didn't touch his earnings. He saved them on this trusted website. But the unexpected happened. The website crashed and he lost all his hard-earned savings. Jack became depressed. This didn't seem too good for Jack. He grew lean within a few weeks as he wouldn't eat but cry all night. His mom consoled him, but he wasn't getting all of that. All he wanted was a miracle. He wanted his money. He had too many plans for the money. That was the money he had planned to establish his mom with. He felt so discouraged. Building and nurturing a new account from scratch wasn't a quick bone to break. The market got competitive by the day. He had no access to any of his top clients again, and he had no way to reach them as they only transacted on the website, as that was the policy. The platform promised to kick back and pay up every freelancer affected by the unfortunate technical problem. Jack waited about 2 months to get a response from them, but nothing seemed forthcoming, and every action to reach out to their customer support was futile. Jack accepted his fate and decided to channel his determination towards something else. This time, he started working for a logistics company. He helped people clean up their apartments and got paid stipends, and he did this for months, even though it wasn't advisable for his health. His mom warned him to stop because of his health status, but Jack was too determined to stop her mom from working as a janitor and raise cash again so he could establish her. Unfortunately, his mom became ill. She was diagnosed with complications because of stress and the humid, filthy places she was working. She was forced to stop working as a janitress, at least pending the time she recovered. They had to keep her on medications to aid her recovery. Drugs were expensive, and hospital admission was more expensive. Jack spent all the money he had saved on her mom's health so she could be okay again. He exhausted everything he had. He had to double his hustle to keep the mom fine and save her from dying. He decided to add delivery work to his cleaning job. This time, he had to combine academics with his two challenging jobs. He would rush to school every morning after having a short sleep. He would leave school before the usual time to resume his cleaning. He would joggle his schedule to meet up with clients' deliveries. Sometimes he delivered late and got several lashbacks from their clients. The company he was working for had sanctioned him twice and threatened that on the third strike he would be dismissed. In the run to save his mom, trying to see her mom get back on her feet, Jack faced some health problems, nervousness, and panic attacks. He was weak and vulnerable. The health problems were highly expected. An autistic guy like him shouldn't stress himself too much, but Jack couldn't help. He had responsibilities on his shoulder. His mom asked him to stop worrying about her and that she would be fine. The doctors restricted him from working. This is the end, he thought, as tears dropped in his eyes. The doctors supervised Jack for 1 week to ensure that he didn't sneak to work behind their backs. After a week, he got a bit better and returned to the company he was working for. Sadly, the company hired someone to take his place since he was absent for a week with no upfront notice. He tried explaining to them that he had been ill and was under strict orders not to leave the hospital, but they weren't patronizing him. After a lot of pleas, he had to leave there with shame. Tears had gathered around his eyes and blurred his sight as he walked like a helpless beggar. He also rammed into a car that was coming without even noticing. The man's honking at him brought him back to reality. The man cursed him and went his way. Jack couldn't even pick a fence because he was the one at fault. He walked down to the hospital where his mom was admitted. As he got to the hospital entrance, he slipped and slumped, hitting his arm hard on the floor. Immediately, he lost consciousness. The nurses ran towards him and rushed him into the emergency ward, a different ward from his mom's. After a few hours, he sneezed from his deep sleep and opened his eyes. The doctors calmed him down and assured him everything was okay. They handed him the handkerchief and his phone that had fallen off his back pocket after he slumped. He asked about his mom, and they told him she was sleeping, and she didn't even know about what had happened to him. He collected his phone. He noticed he had missed calls from his mom and a mail notification displaying on his phone lock screen, but ignored the mail. He unlocked his phone to call his mom and assure her he was fine. Having unlocked his phone, he could read the mail's headline. Surprisingly, it was from the freelance platform he was working with and had all his savings stuck in after they experienced a severe technical setback. The headline read, "Hi, dear Jack, we are back, and we are stronger." He was astonished. He quickly clicked the mail to read up on everything. Yes, it was that great news he had been waiting for. He quickly signed in, and it was accessible. He jumped up and screamed. His right arm was bandaged and healing, but it didn't matter. His scream got everyone's attention, including the doctors, and they all ran into his ward thinking something terrible had happened. He asked the doctors how much their bill was, and they told him. He assured them he would be back the following day. He dashed out headed to his mom's ward, and wrapped his hands around her. He shared the good news with her, and she was elated too. Jack demanded a withdrawal of all his savings. The request was granted after he was able to verify that he owned the account. After 12 hours, his earnings were sent to his mom's history, which he had linked as his beneficiary. The following day, he cleared all their bills, and they were still left with a considerable amount to establish his mom, just like he had envisioned. The mom was admitted after a week. Jack resumed school and had access to his clients who had missed him. They started working together on new projects while Jack's mom quit her job as a janitor and started her own business. Jack's bullies stopped bullying him too. They were able to get a mini supermarket for his mom in a commercial area. Both the autist guy and his janitress mom lived a better and happier life ever after.
Her life was sad since childhood. She was born into a large family, fifth child. Her father was a heavy drinker. Her mother was always busy with her affairs or other children. She was very lonely. She felt no one needed her. The grief happened when Mary was 6 years old. Her father died. The times began terribly. They didn't have enough money all the time, but they had good people who brought food and clothes. Her mother fell into depression when Mary's father died. Mom's tantrums happened quite often, as well as nervous breakdowns. Her mother took her anger out on the children. She yelled at them constantly, sometimes even beat them. Her mother didn't love Mary and got hurt a lot, but she was the smallest and couldn't defend herself. She was punished for every wrongdoing. Mary was troubled with her mother for the bruises and for calling her names, insulting and humiliating her. Mary would sometimes close herself to her mother in the toilet and scratch the wall with a pen about her unbearable life. Mary's childhood was just like that. Mary moved to the 7th grade and met a girl named Bella as her class was new. Bella was a pariah. No one was friends with her, and all her classmates shunned her. But Mary decided to go against everyone. The class hated both girls. The break at school was a nightmare. Mary and Bella were throwing dirty rags at coated clothes with chalk. Bullying of girls became permanent at school, and Mary switched to homeschooling. She graduated with difficulty. Mary got her first job at 17. She was washing dishes in the dining room. She became a kitchen worker 6 months later, and then she got a job as a cook. Mary had been working for 2 years in the cafeteria, where the men who liked her often went. She met Adam there. Mary fell in love quickly, and they moved in together. Adam often went away on business trips, and Mary was very painfully separated. Adam went away on another business trip, and Mary couldn't get through to Adam all day, and the next morning a woman answered her phone and told her that Adam was asleep. Mary hung up on her, at which point the whole world collapsed. Her tears rolled down her cheeks. She didn't understand why Adam did this to her because she loved him so much. They were married together. After a while, Mary forgot about Adam. She often walked along the waterfront alone and thought of life. Adam was waiting for her in a dark alley with a knife one night. He grabbed Mary from behind, hit the building hard, pulled out a knife, and stabbed her in the ribs. Mary was shaking with fear and horror. She could not yet understand that Adam was standing behind her. He turned her around after 2 minutes, and she was stunned. Adam was high. His eyes were angry, full of rage. He grabbed Mary's hand, but did not remove the knife. He dragged her down to the road. His car was there and ordered me to go with him. Adam brought her to the apartment. Then they spent the night together, and by the morning, Adam had fallen asleep, and Mary had managed to escape. Mary avoided Adam and did not return his calls. She met another man in the dining room at the time, Jack. Jack came from out of town for work. They started seeing each other a lot. Jack would walk Mary home every night, and one night Adam was waiting for them outside the house. The men began to fight, and Mary ran home. Jack won the fight, and Adam left Mary alone. Jack asked Mary to marry them after 6 months, and she agreed. Their wedding was modest, with only relatives. Mary got pregnant 3 months later. Her pregnancy was difficult. She often lay in the hospital. Her child was born on time, but frail. He was often ill and developmentally challenging. The child became very sick when he was 1.5 years old. The doctors didn't think much of his illness. They said it was just a cough, prescribed him pills, and sent them home. The baby began to feel very bad. Mary called an ambulance 4 days later. The baby had a high fever. Unfortunately, the child died in the hospital 3 days later. It was pneumonia, which his weak body could not cope with. Mary had not spoken to anyone for 3 weeks. She prayed every day and cried, and Mary did not understand why her life punished her. Then Mary decided to divorce her husband 2 months later. She had no feelings for him. He came home one day not sober, and Mary decided to talk to him about the divorce. He beat her very badly that evening. Jack was kicking and punching her. Mary was drowning in tears, begging Jack to stop hitting her. His punch was powerful. Jack kneed Mary on the head. Mary passed out. Jack became sober the following day. He realized what he had done. Mary filed a police report on Jack at the time. Jack was called to the police, and after talking to the police, he returned home. Jack kneeling and begging Mary to withdraw the statement from the police. Mary was very angry with Jack, but agreed to start the application if they divorced quickly. Jack agreed. The property was sold, and the money was divided equally. Mary was trying to forget what had happened to her over the past few years. She called her friend Gwen, who had been friends for a long time, and Mary called her to meet her. Gwen was popular with men, so she had many friends. She brought Mary to her friends. There were many handsome, charming men, but Mary only noticed one. Michael turned out to be. He was tall, slim, and hilarious. He grew up in a good family. His father was a prosecutor. Michael went to police school, but never graduated from police school. He tried to work as a lawyer, but failed. He did not work permanently. They quickly hit it off. Michael went to work for a month. They called each other every day and got much closer. They started dating a month later. Michael was very romantic, sometimes gentle. He asked Mary to live together. She moved into his house. Everything changed at one point when his father died. Michael suddenly became very angry and cruel. His father gave him money and protected him from crime before, and everything changed at one point. Mary and Michael ran out of cash. Michael was left in debt, and Mary was threatened. Mary worked as a small store salesman then and had barely enough money to buy groceries and pay utility bills. Michael owed a lot of money, so they had to move to another town because they threatened his whole family. They moved to the big city, rented an apartment, and started a new life. Mary was trying to find a job, and Michael was pretending to look for a job. He wasn't going to work. Money started running out. Michael's mom sent them more money, but she said it was the last time. Soon, that money was running out. The rent had to be paid. Mary sold her computer out of despair. The money came from the sale. It was enough for a month. Mary was sitting by the window and didn't know what to do. There was no money left, no job, no rent. A fight arose amidst these problems between Michael and Mary ran into the bedroom and closed the door, and Michael was furious, and he broke down the bathroom door. He realized what he had done, told her to pack her things, and said they were leaving the next day. Michael called his friend, and he came to pick them up. Michael's friend took them to Michael's grandmother's. Mary got a job after 1 month, and she got a job at a small bakery. She worked every day because there was no money. Michael lay on the couch all day, and when his grandmother kicked him out of the house, he didn't come back sober and angry. Michael said a week later that he had found a job. The job was at the construction site. He left every day in the morning and returned in the evening. He promised that the money would be paid, but later, Michael didn't bring the money, even after 2 weeks. Mary had saved up money for that time to get a room. Michael took the money gladly and started looking for a place to live. They didn't move in. They kept living with Grandma. Mary started talking to Michael about renting. He seemed nervous, and she realized he was lying. He stole his grandmother's money, and it turns out he was drinking and living for a while. And then he started gambling and needed more money. Mary gave him the money to rent a place, and he lost it. Mary was desperate. She got involved with an alcoholic, gambler, and thief in the same person. Michael was proud and was not ashamed to tell everyone that his dad was a prosecutor. Everything was revealed, and then there was a terrible scandal. Michael grabbed Mary by the hair and began to beat her in front of his grandmother. Mary had endured everything. She had nowhere to go. Mary was almost broke, and home was a long way away. Grandma left after 1 month and left their things on the landing. They spent 3 days on their belongings at the entrance. Michael called his mother, who sent a car to pick them up. They came home. Mary got a job back at the store, and Michael took his time with work. He had spent his father's money before and didn't want to do anything. Michael started drinking a lot of alcohol from idleness. Life was unbearable for Mary. He caused her scandals at work and insulted and humiliated her. Mary called the police often. Michael avoided responsibility because he had many friends among the police. Mary tried to break up with Michael. He stalked her, threatened her, and beat her on the street. She was afraid to leave work sometimes to go home. Michael's mom told her she was sick of it. She blamed Mary for choosing Michael. Michael stopped drinking a month later, started acting normal, and they started dating again. Michael got a good job as a driver 4 months later. The business trip dragged on, he didn't pick up his phone all day, and the next morning a girl answered his phone and said that Michael didn't want to talk to Mary. The world collapsed for the second time. Mary didn't believe it was happening to her. The story repeated itself as with Adam. Mary was in utter despair. She didn't want to see anyone. She didn't talk to anyone. Mary shut down and became depressed. She couldn't survive the betrayal again because she forgave Michael so much, tolerated his abuse, and he did that to her. Mary saw only one way out. Mary met a lovely man named Tom on Tinder. He lived in a different city and invited Mary to come and meet him. Mary decided a month later. She took some things and visited Tom. The acquaintance was excellent. They spent a wonderful 3 weeks together, but had to return home. Tom only let Mary go on the condition that she return in 1 month and move in with him forever. Mary settled all her problems in 1 month, packed her things, and moved in with Tom. She wanted to leave all her memories of resentment at home and never think about them. After all, she was finally going to have a good life. Mary had moved in with Tom. A year had passed since then. Mary felt beautiful. No one had ever hurt her in that house. The nerves returned to normal. Mary became much calmer. The man was with Mary, who cared for her, not bullied her. Tom was a hard-working and responsible man. He never humiliated or betrayed Mary, so she loved and valued him so much. They often went for a walk in the woods. Mary remembered walking alone, and now her walks were always with Tom. He supported her always, even in the most foolish endeavors. Mary turned 30 today and became happy. She managed to forgive all those who hurt her. She was able to forget almost all the terrible things she did. She became much kinder to everyone and learned to trust people again. Life began with a new line. Now, all the bad things are behind us.
It was the 17th of July, just past 7 p.m. Andy was devastated. His mother, Pauline, had just broken the unfortunate news that his father had left her for someone else sexier. This meant that she no longer had a husband, and that more importantly to poor Andy, he no longer had a father. Throughout the rest of July, he struggled with depression and came extremely close to giving up. The realization that he had lost the father figure that had always been exceptionally important to him was finally kicking in. All those fond memories of their time together suddenly flooded him. That one time they were fishing, Andy fell in the lake because the fish overpowered him. Thrashing at football, and all those times his father came home drunk and became violent. In Andy's mind, these drunken fits of rage were always brushed off as occasional outbursts because of a stress-filled life. Due to his autism, Andy was vastly intelligent, and while he rightly took his autism in stride and correctly viewed it as a strength rather than a weakness, it had always led to 2 significant problems. The first was not being able to pick up on certain things, which is why he never realized until now that his father was a violent and selfish man. Secondly, he suffered from social anxiety and difficulty with making friends plagued him. He admired many people and shared similar interests, but ultimately struggled to connect with them because of how shy and overwhelmed he could suddenly get. As a result of this, he was hit even harder by his father's actions, as he had no friends to rely on and be comforted by. Andy's mother, Pauline, was aware of this, and despite her being upset, she bought Andy an invaluable gift to try and comfort him in any way possible: a laptop. Her reasoning was not only to ensure that Andy had something to occupy his time and prevent boredom, but it was also a new way for him to find friends and socialize online. She hoped communicating online would help him feel less shy when approaching people, and it seemed to initially take away the immense pain he was experiencing, which was great. He quickly created an Instagram, Facebook, and Discord page to meet new people. All was seemingly swimmingly, but people began to laugh at him and send hateful messages because of who he was. Andy had never owned a laptop before, so he didn't know what he was doing. This led to situations like him messaging his mother, but accidentally sending these messages into open posts and public forums, leading to humiliation. Things worsened when he told these people about his new idea for a fledgling startup project. "You'll never achieve anything, you absolute fucking cretin. Not in a trillion years. Might as well quit while you're ahead. It saves you wasting your time and us laughing when you fail." These horrible, offensive, spiteful insults were hurled at Andy, shaking him to his core. This deeply affected Andy so much. As a result, he ended up spending August in isolation. However, this could benefit him as it provided vital time to work on something. Fueled by the anguish that he still felt because of his father, he worked hard on creating a program to simulate human behavior. Why did he do this? He wanted to ensure that in the future, he wouldn't have to suffer from bullying or missing a cue, because using his program, getting to know people and reading their emotions and thoughts would be a lot easier. December 1st rolled around, and Andy was starting to communicate with more and more people. He took the newfound knowledge from previous experiences with people online, and now made sure to send his mom messages more privately. He tried to find interests in people similar to his, and created engaging and meaningful conversations out of them. He noted these topics of interest and other aspects of the individuals, and put them into his algorithm. Based on the results, he'd know whether they were compatible with him, which was reassuring. To the shock of Andy and Pauline, the program had grown rapidly in popularity over the past few months, and Andy became rich and famous as a result of this just within a few months. His dad caught wind of this and wanted to become a part of their lives again, but they weren't gullible or stupid. Far from it. In fact, ironically, Pauline ran her husband through the algorithm, and even it determined that he was completely unreliable. Andy's father tried his best to worm his way back in, but Pauline and Andy were fed up with these desperate and pitiful cries, so they moved away to a new address so they would no longer need to be disturbed. The flights were booked, and Edinburgh, Scotland, was set firmly in their sights. The most exciting aspect of this was similar for Andy and his mother. Andy had a friend called Levi on Discord and lived in Berwick-upon-Tweed, which is quite close, whereas his mom had a handsome man named Rodriguez. While managing the algorithm for company, Andy, he just so happened to live in Edinburgh again. It was now mid-December, and everything was great. Andy and his mom were living thanks to the immense success of the program comfortably. Although it was a cold December's Eve, Andy felt like shopping and exploring Edinburgh, which was still relatively unfamiliar to him. It was a frigid night, the city barren and ominous. As the snow began to fall and the trees glistened, he was starstruck. An excellent sight was gracing his eyes. Among the trees was a little gift shop with intriguing and aesthetically appealing lights illuminating its exterior. He was so intrigued by these lights that he strolled up to the shop and looked into the front window. It turned out to be a pawn shop. Andy had been looking for Christmas gifts, so he thought it'd be at least worth a punt to browse this shop. Knocking the door several times, he noticed a slight, frail silhouette slowly making its way to the door. "How can I help you, young man?" passionately spoke the elderly gentleman. Andy explained he was looking for a nice Christmas gift. The gentleman led him to the technology section and the assortment of phones. He had amassed quite a collection of brand new phones. "I'll take a few, kind sir." He smiled at the gentleman, as he knew what he would ask next. "How many is a few, young man?" Andy continued to smile, thinking of the happiness that this would bring. 173, please." A few days later, and it was the 26th of December, 2018. Christmas had come and gone. Pauline had met a new man called Dan while he was working as their business manager. He proposed to her on Christmas Day. While Andy was initially quite skeptical, he passed the reliability test, the only evidence needed to prove that Dan was perfect for Pauline. Being in such a positive mood, due to the thought of him and his mom finally being truly happy again, he started to wrap up the 173 iPhones. As bizarre as it sounds, this number wasn't random. Andy had noted every person that previously said kind things, stuck up for him, and was overall a good friend to him. Now that he was living comfortably, successfully, he wanted to spread a little Christmas cheer and give something back to the people who genuinely cared. Luckily, the iPhone boxes were only so small that he could fit all 173 into his mom's car boot, and they drove to the post office together. They were all sent off to be delivered to multiple addresses. To show this appreciation for his true friends, he wrote a heartwarming message on the back of each of the 173 parcels. It read, "To my best friend from the unknown, I hope this gift brings you some happiness. If so, I will be happy." He originally intended for the parcel to be anonymous. Giving back was all that mattered to him personally. Them knowing about it was irrelevant. Unfortunately, though, Andy forgot to tell the post office this while providing the iPhone cases. Ultimately, his name and address were unintentionally plastered on the back of the parcels. It was now New Year's Day. Andy, his mother, and his new stepfather, Terry. He had just booked his holiday from work. A client was asking for numbers and book for his business accounts to be sorted out, but it was New Year's Day, and all that mattered to him was family. They were chatting amongst themselves until a knock at the door. They lived in rural Scotland. They had to drive 30 miles to reach the nearest post office, so a knock at the door, it wasn't heard of. Terry got up, curious as to who it was on the other side of the door. It was a courier with a parcel. It was from one of the addresses Andy sent an iPhone. It turned out to be the same package, unopened. Somehow the note had managed to stay firmly attached. It said, "Andy, you left your address visible, you donut. Thanks for the sweet message, though I don't want an iPhone. Being your friend is all I need. Love, Davina. P.S. I live nearby. Meet me at the old Hitchington Lake on the 5th of January at noon." He boarded the bus around 1 p.m., chilled and ready to meet Davina. As the bus drove, he noticed small cottages, a barrage of wildlife, and a surprisingly dry Scottish day. He loved the atmosphere, mainly striking ambience that was somewhat comforting. The bus arrived at 1:30, which was good, as he wanted to practice his social skills and be prepared. Standing by the river, he noticed a partially broken swing. Usually he would stay clear of this, but he needed the confidence to speak to Davina, so he decided to live a little. It was fun at first, but then the rope dwindled, and within seconds it snapped, and he fell directly into the lake. When the fishing incident happened with his dad, he was okay, because he was with someone, but this time he was on his own. And swimming to safety wasn't an option, because he didn't know how to. It all seemed over, and just as he started to flail and struggle, a faint voice was audible. Suddenly, a young girl of a similar age to Andy dived into the river and grabbed him. She guided him out of the water and saved him. He was shaken, but he was still alive. "You saved me." "Andy, I told you to meet me by the river, not in the river." As if it were destiny, Davina and Andy quickly grew to like each other. Love at first sight. Andy endured a challenging year, but he had gained a new family against all of the seemingly impossible odds. Not one new addition, but two.